Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. This is Sharing Power, looking at leadership structures. And my name is Kinsey Keck. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a white, non-disabled person with shoulder-length brown hair. Half of it is pulled up in a little bun today. I'm wearing large metal framed glasses and a cozy dark green sweater. I'm also the programming and membership manager for the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. So the Roundtable is a grassroots service organization working to improve and advance the state of arts education through professional development workshops, advocacy, and online resources and platforms to connect the arts education field. Although we are currently meeting via Zoom today, the Roundtable would like to acknowledge that we work and live on stolen land. The place that we call New York City exists on the traditional, ancestral, unceded land of the Canarsie, Lenape, Munsee, and Wappinger people. So we'd like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and immigrant communities which have helped build the city that we know today. As we travel in their footsteps, we recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined. Thank you. So before we get started, I just want to share a few reminders with you all. If you're having any trouble with Zoom at all, you can please send me or our conference coordinator, Megan Zhang, a private message. You can also refer to our Zoom one sheet, which will be pasted in the chat right now. We are in a webinar at this moment, so you don't have to worry about being on or off video. There may be some moments where we invite folks to raise their hand to come off of mute, and we will give you instructions to do that as we go through our event today. I do want to note that this webinar does include closed captioning. To activate that setting, just click the live transcript button on your toolbar and select show subtitles. As you can see, this call also includes live ASL interpretation throughout. We also just want to encourage you to use the chat box to connect with your fellow participants and share resources. Any of the resources shared there in the chat transcript itself will be saved and shared in a follow-up email in the coming days. This webinar will also include a Q&A portion near the end. If you have questions for our panelists, please just put those in the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll hopefully get to as many of those as possible. I also do want to note that the session is being recorded. The recording will be made available on the Roundtable's website, YouTube, and Vimeo channels. And I would love to shout out our sponsors for Face2Face 2021, Resilience and Reinvention. We'd love to thank Disney, National Dance Institute, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, without whose generosity this conference would not have been possible. And before we get going, just one other invitation. We would love for you all to stick around in the Zoom webinar directly after the session for Show Your Face. That's our post-session chat. Today it's going to be with Asari Beal, Executive Director of Teachers and Writers Collaborative, Tracy Lester, Executive Director for the Center for Fiction, and Erica Atkins, Executive Director, Bloomingdale School of Music. We're really excited to have them all here to debrief after this session. So just hang around and we'll invite you to be panelists if you want to take part in the conversation. And that's it for announcements. Thanks for bearing with me. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our moderator for today's panel, independent consultant Brooke Whitaker-Royster. Brooke is an experienced international arts consultant, skillfully moving through the fine and performing arts, education, multimedia, and tech sectors. Her work focuses on inspiring and creating sustainable business practices in the formation of innovative, diverse, and groundbreaking programming. Brooke, take it away.
Thank you, Kinsey. So yes, I'm Brooke Whitaker-Royster. I am a Black woman in a white dress sitting in front of a gray wall unit. I'm actually just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping before we kick off and I get to introduce our amazing panel. Actually, my housekeeping is just a couple of quick thank yous. Firstly, thank you to the Roundtable for inviting me to be a part of Face2Face this year and for facilitating so many really urgent and authentic conversations in this space. Secondly, specifically to Kinsey Keck and Darrell Cooper for putting together and keeping together these puzzle pieces. I know from experience that that is not an easy job to do, but here we are, all three of our faces in one place finally, thanks to your work. And I'm really excited about that. This is a conversation that all of us kind of come to from different directions and perspectives. But I would argue that when you get right down to it, we all fit not necessarily neatly, but into one of two profiles. There are those who have power and those who do not. And on the other side of the year that was 2020, we are all hopefully further along in our resolve to acknowledge and act to interrogate systems that make that so to all ends, but especially in ways that are relevant to our field and the way that we work. And so to help us do that today, we have with us a special panel of people who I'm thrilled to announce to you. First among them is Tim Cynova. You're gonna have to forgive me for reading these bios, but these are people who have done lots of work and I wanna sort of give them the respect that's due. Tim is co-CEO at Fractured Atlas. Tim wears a multitude of hats, all in service of creating anti-racist workspaces where people can thrive. He is currently co-CEO of the US-based nonprofit Fractured Atlas, a 20-year-old organization that in 2013 committed to becoming anti-racist and anti-oppressive in its work and operations. Relatedly, he is a principal of the consulting group Work, Shouldn't, Suck, that assists organizations of all sizes and sectors with the how of creating anti-racist workspaces. Tim serves on the faculty of Canada's Banff Center for Arts and Creativity and New York's The New School, teaching courses in people-centric organizational design. He's a trained mediator and a certified senior professional in human resources. He also co-hosts a popular podcast under the Work Shouldn't Suck moniker. Earlier in his career, Tim was the executive director of the Parsons Dance Company and of the High Five Tickets to the Arts in New York City, had a memorable stint with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, was a one-time classical trombonist, musicologist, and for 5 years in his youth, he delivered newspapers for the Evansville, Indiana Courier Press. Also during a particularly slow summer, he bicycled 3,902 miles across the United States. That's worth a round of applause. Next, Toya Lillard. Toya is the executive director of Vibe Theater Experience. A native Houstonian, Toya graduated from Houston's High School for Performing and Visual Arts. She has directed plays, developed curricula, led advocacy efforts, and implemented innovative teaching artist training programs both in and out of our city's schools. Prior to joining Vibe, Toya served as director of school programs for the New York Philharmonic's Education Department, where she helped to develop its nationally recognized school partnership program. In addition to leading Vibe Theater Experience, Toya is also a part-time faculty member at the New School, where she teaches global dramatic literature, devised theater, and Portfolio One. Toya is also an adjunct professor at CUNY City Tech, where she teaches Black theater. Toya holds a BA from Vassar College and an MA from New York University's Gallatin School of Individualized Study. Toya serves on the board of New York City Arts and Education Roundtable and is an affiliate representative on the board of the Downtown Brooklyn Arts Alliance. Welcome to you both. At the top of the hour, I just wanted to note that we asked a couple of questions on the Mentimeter, just to get a kind of a read on people who are in the room. And I think it's worth keeping in mind the way that our attendees responded in moments where it might make sense to speak to them directly. But let's get started. This first question is fairly easy. You know, when we started thinking about sharing power, the one thing and power and the power dynamics that surround that, the one thing that sort of occurred to me is how difficult it is to just do good work wherever white supremacist values are sort of taking hold. And so I wanted to ask the question actually to both of you. Generally, work in the nonprofit sector sort of appeals to our senses of charity and goodwill. And I'm curious to know how you arrived at your organization or at your position, and what is the good work that you wanted to carry out? I'm going to direct that to Toya first.
Thank you. I just want to say at the outset, I have issues with the word charity. I think if we're talking about white supremacy and white supremacist structures, that word is problematic. So I just want to name it at the outset. I came into this work through my community's understanding of what it means to build community and be in community and to organize around the needs of communities, as well as the arts, right? So I'm from Third Ward, Houston, Texas, born and raised. And I grew up, you know, at the intersection of what people call art and activism. But for people in Third Ward, it was just figuring out how to survive and get along in a city that was culturally rich and where Black and Brown people were typically under-resourced and or poor. So growing up enjoying the cultural riches of Houston, my aunt was and is artistic director of the first Black professional theater in the Southwest, the Ensemble Theater. So this notion of charity, I never heard that word ever growing up. And I don't want to name and note that because many people in this Zoom room come out of the same traditions of just being in community. Shout out to Shape Community Center and growing up around, with principles and core values around community organizing. So that is how I sort of came into this work, really steeped like a tea bag in both the arts and in traditions of community organizing. That many of us Black and Brown folks who come into this work because we have been raised in communities that have organized. This notion of charity, again, is related to the saviorism that is connected to white supremacy. And I want to name and lift up the communities and the ecosystems that lifted me up and that lifted up many people in the Zoom room. And I think they're as worthy of note and notoriety as what we consider charity or goodwill. So my journey from Houston, Texas to this Zoom room includes a lot of folk, a village that enabled me to attend college in New York City and then graduate school and be trained by the best to do this work. It involves me being in rooms where people like me were typically shut out, being invited into spaces where there wasn't really a place prepared for me, but an invitation in. And navigating those rooms and those spaces while also endeavoring to create opportunities for other folks who look like me did not necessarily make me a lot of friends until recently. Like in the last 18 months, and continue to do the work because I knew that instinctively I wanted to recreate those community organizing and community building efforts that I was the recipient of. So I'll just stop there.
Awesome. Okay, what about you, Tim?
Yeah, so excited to be here with both of you and the group. I grew up wanting to be the next conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, being a classical trombonist and former newspaper carrier, I guess. and sort of wound my way from there. Thankfully for the world of music, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, I did not become the next conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, but discovered real passion and purpose in working with arts organizations. Initially orchestras, then modern dance companies, and then into an art service organization like Fractured Atlas, where I've been for 12 years now, and really spent most of my time with people-centric organizational design, traditionally HR. Although I think HR is very narrowly focused. Most people think comp benefits, maybe performance reviews, but thinking more holistically around as nonprofits, as organizations, as bringing people together, how do we want to live and be? And how can we align the work that we do, the noble work that organizations such as nonprofits are committed to align with people's purpose and create places where people can thrive. And as we layer on or look at the characteristics of white supremacy culture that are deeply embedded in these organizations, just by the nature of them being organizations, things like defensiveness and power hoarding and fear of open conflict, paternalism, all of these things make it so much more challenging to create places where everyone can thrive. And the past decade or so, as a white cisgender heterosexual man who has privilege and power, what's my role in the work? That's been my journey. And most recently being a part of a 4-person shared non-hierarchical leadership team when our CEO left about 4 years ago. Now we're a 2-person team, but looking at how does power show up? How does influence show up in our organizations? How can we question what it means to be a CEO? What is that CEO function? How can we seed, be some way to visually represent SEED and CEDE, but how can we seed power throughout organizations and really live in this moment? Just point out, like we're living through a moment in history where the impossible, or seemingly the impossible, is now possible. And what's required of us as white people and as organizations to, I don't know, I'll back up like 2 words and put a period there, or a question mark. I will stop there.
Great, thank you. I want to thank Toya for kind of zeroing in on the problematic nature of the concept of charity. In the spirit of that, I'm just curious to know, oftentimes the unwillingness to address these imbalances in power is exacerbated because there really is no acknowledgement of a breakdown to begin with. And so without those sorts of corrections, it's really difficult to do that. I'm wondering if there was a point in your professional life where you began to sort of experience the impact of faulty power dynamic. Toya's smiling, so I want her to. You look like you want to answer.
I'm just looking at the participants. I want to. Who's in the room? Who's in the Zoom room? Really, it matters not. The truth is the truth, right? And I speak my truth in every Zoom room. Having been trained and, a part of, predominantly white elite institutions my entire life, this power issue has really been potent, and you hard pressed to find a Black woman who doesn't think about power a lot, right? But when I worked for the New York Philharmonic for 10 years, and as you said, if you had asked me when I started, I didn't know what a nonprofit industrial complex was. I actually, had maybe just a working definition of what a white supremacist structure was. That language was not used at all. I just knew that I was a brown woman in an institution that was all white, working with a constituency of people who looked like me. And I was, okay, what? Okay. There's something funky about this though, because I don't have any power in my working and reach and the ways that I worked with them, and the big decisions, right? I had the and I want to name that. I think there are different types, there's positional power, personal power. And as I have progressed in my career, my positional power now is different than it was when I worked at the New York Philharmonic. So I was very aware of my lack of power in terms of being able to make things easier for the young people that we were serving. For example, we would have these school day concerts and spend a lot of time preparing our students for the school day concerts and going over the music that they would hear, the composers, getting them to compose things in the spirit of what they were hearing. And the kids would come so excited. They would come on their school buses from the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens, so excited that they're just jumping in their seats. And orchestra members would see these, Black and brown kids jumping in their seats and lean over and go, shh. Which, to the kid would bum them out, be like, well, I don't want to be here, get me out of this place. I hate Lincoln Center. And witnessing that year after year and really feeling like powerless in terms of insulating these kids from harm, well-meaning adults, but who were causing harm. So that was a place where I felt this real, I felt connected to the constituency that we were working with, but this real disconnect in the organization that I worked for because of the power structures. And also, just to name it, white supremacy, because I looked like the people we were serving. I kind of got treated like them too. That's just the truth, y'all. What do you want me to say?
The truth is the truth. The truth is the truth. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, that's powerful. No, sorry, this is one of those moments where I was just listening to Toya and I just forgot I was on a panel. So I apologize to both of you and everyone else because
Me too.
I was just in it and just listening. So I'm going to leave with my apologies on that one. Thank you for that. I think I'll catch you on the next one.
Not a problem. I think as Toya was talking, you're sort of parroting an experience that I think lots of Black women, particularly, have in these kinds of white institutions. And I'm curious because you mentioned positional power. I'm thinking about the incongruence between leadership and power it's a perpetual topic in all professional dimensions. We all talk about it constantly. But I wonder if leadership and power are even compatible ideas in the nonprofit model. What do you think about that, Tim?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about power in leader-full organizations. And thinking about organizations are just a collection of people trying to accomplish something. And like five friends trying to figure out where to go to dinner. That's a collection of people trying to figure out where you want to go. And there's power and there's leadership in different ways. And thinking about how the power distinctions, whether it be positional or otherwise, for those in the organization, how people without formal positions of leadership can actually be more influential in other positions in the organization. So I've really been sitting with those, especially as we think about our own organization and thinking about the context of ceding power. Like, what would it look like to lean into a co-leadership, non-hierarchical model, maybe into an entirely flat organization? What would that transition look like? What would you need to do in the organization to prepare people for those types of roles? And I think it's really, I've been sitting with that a lot as someone who thinks, all right, so what is that thing? And then how do you do it? And where I spend most of my day is like, all right, so how do you roll out unlimited vacation days? Seems like easy, but let's figure that one out. Or how do you transition from a single CEO to a 4-person team? And it involves board resolutions and convincing Chase Bank that no, you don't have a CEO, so someone's got to sign this piece of paper. And it's, as we think about the time in which we're living, it's really been, I don't know, the how power shows up, I guess for me is showing up in a different way, or the concept of power is showing up in a different way as we think about, again, this concept of seeding power and preparing people for the roles. Like what's our responsibility as organizations to the people who work with us to have what they need to be successful in these roles. Maybe they have it already, but I think it takes interrogating our responsibility in not a paternalistic way, it's sort of a co-creation way, but what do people need in an organization to be able to thrive in an alternate structure that's not, a pyramid that's largely based on the military and massive corporations. And we've got there's just 10 people at our organization. We could sit, not ours, I think, are 19, but we could all sit around the same conference room table. So why do we have all these different structures and hierarchies? What would it look like if we just built something that fit the way we wanted to work? And more importantly, our values that we hold as people and as organizations. And so that's when I think about leadership and power, those are some of the things that come to mind and that resonate with me. And then my responsibility to help to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think the people in our field who are leading this work very rarely have the power. We are in a system that has a tradition of siphoning the gems from people who are really leading and attaching it to the folks who are called the leaders. And we know in this field that the folks who are called the leaders are very rarely the ones who are really leading the work on the ground. They are the ones with the title. They're the ones who have the trust of the funders. They're the ones who look like the funders, to just be more plain about it. So we know in our field that the leadership is coming from someplace other than the executive leaders, the folks who are at the top. We know this, yet we invest heavily in the folks at the top. And then they go and, basically pull from the talent pool of the people who are really leading the work, who never get recognized or named. Many of those are Black women. So I think as we parse out this idea of power from leadership, we have to understand that there's a tradition in our field of creating and sustaining barriers to having real power. And that many folks have titles that they enjoy that don't have any power attached to them because they don't have the trust of the folks who are funding the work. The more honest and transparent we are about the situation that we're in, the better positioned we are to do something about it. But we tend to be in, this situation where we are living in this, alternate reality in arts education, whereby we say things like diversity and inclusion matter, and that is the work, and that's it. So power would mean, really unpacking where the power lies, means, again, looking at ecosystems of support and looking at where the support, where the genius art, where the ideas, where the hot stuff is coming from. And I guarantee you, it's not coming from the executive leadership. And that's just the truth. So if we're going to empower leaders, then the folks who have the power need to seed it.
And I think, I think it makes sense to talk through, thank you, Toya. I think it makes sense to talk through also, what the consequences of these failures are. We can, I've heard you say before, even my saying, I've heard you say before that we always have these conversations about shifting power and sharing power, but no one ever does it. And so, there are example after example. We have a long history of, talking about how to do this, but not doing it. And I'm wondering if both of you can speak to sort of the consequences that you can see, that you personally have experienced of these failures.
Traditionally in nonprofits, there's been no reward for risk. If you just think about like the executive director, you can do something innovative. If it works out, great. You get to keep your job, the same salary. If it doesn't work out, you lose your job. So there's no incentive for risk taking and sort of the innovative things that funders say that they appreciate, that the field says, let's do some innovative stuff. If we look at the organization, especially amid a global pandemic, where organizations are having to make the painful decisions to lay off staff or cut programs, the barrier for like not having a workplace that supports people, risk, this is really high to speak from within the organization. What if I say something, there's not the psychological safety and I lose my job? It's already a challenge in the quote unquote, or I guess pre-pandemic times. But leaders need to recognize if you're not building the psychological safety and trust, those are big hurdles to clear for those in your organization. They might not want to speak up for fear of losing their job. For if something doesn't go right, then then they have to own that. So I guess in the past 12 months, it's felt like there's been at the same point that the bar for being innovative is so low. Your organization might go out of business in the next 6 months. So why not try? Sorry, I just said, my wife is a public school teacher. She's like, you're never coming to career day because you might drop the F-bomb. Sorry about that. Research shows people who curse are more likely telling you the truth. So I sort of lean on that. But like the bar is so low, try something, try things you didn't think were possible before. But at the same time, for certain positions in the organization, risk is so much more, the risk and the consequence perhaps of being a part of that or saying something is so much higher, or potentially so much higher than it was 12 months ago. Yeah, I love Toya. I'm saying something I can see like Toya reacting, so I'm going to stop. Go.
I'm like, why don't you risk giving up these jobs? Like, I mean, come on, let's be real. Risk giving up a job, go do something else. There's nothing that is going to change until a huge amount of people who are hoarding positions and power stop, doing the platitudinal equity, diversity, inclusion. How are we going to ever be equitable, diverse, or inclusive if the executive leadership stays white? And that's what everybody wants. That's what everybody desperately is trying to happen. And I'm saying, and I get in trouble for saying this, but whatever, at this point, something's got to change. Until people say, okay, I'm giving it up, then we can do all the EDI, DEI, kumbaya dances and cry in each other's coffee and beer and, and all of it, but nothing's going to change. And in my opinion, there's a certain subset of the power that doesn't want it to change because they don't want to give up power, because they don't want to go and do anything else. They want equity, diversity, and inclusion to happen under their leadership, under their control. As George Lipset says, social inclusion happens at the pace of white people and never before.
Well. Yeah. I think this is a good moment to. I'm curious to hear your reactions to the following quote. And I think that there are specific places in this quote that I would like for you to respond to, and I'll point those out. Here it is. The savior mentality is not about individual failings. It is the logical result of a racist, colonialist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal system setting us against each other. And being a savior is not a fixed identity. Under the struggle to survive within capitalism, most of us are forced into decisions that contradict our ideals. Many people are involved in liberation movements in their free time while their day job is at a charity or other nonprofit that does not challenge the status quo. We can be a savior one day and an ally the next. And this is I would like for you to respond to several different places in this quote, but here's the thing that I want you to respond to immediately. The savior mentality always looks for solutions by working within our current system, because deeper change might push us out of the picture. Is that the issue? Is that the issue?
I'll let Tim respond first.
It's part of the issue, especially if you think about 99.9% of nonprofits or organizations for that matter operate the exact same way. It's sort of like the way organizations work. There's like the book about how to run nonprofits. Boards work the same way. That's how you run fundraising campaigns. That's how your organization's structured. Personally, I think this is where it's exciting because we don't have to work this way. We can decide a different way to work. My background is in the arts and creativity. And I find it such a huge disconnect that you have arts organizations that are filled, like administrators of arts organizations are maybe predominantly artists or were artists or are artists, yet a lot of times check their creativity at the door. There might be really great work that's on the stage, on the screen, on the gallery walls, whatever it might be. But like, why aren't we using the same creativity with the structure that we work in? And thinking about white supremacy and how it shows up, being like, that's not the way we want to work. So how would we build that differently? So yeah, I think it's the conventional wisdom. It's the sort of just standard operating procedure. This is the way it is. And without pushing the next step to say, yes, what can it be that's not this? Well, we don't have, resource scarcity. We have to do it. We don't have the time. We don't have the people to do this. What if we had all the resources we needed to do something and we could use this moment to change our structure? Does the next time the executive director leaves say, maybe we should try something different. Maybe we should try different power structures. Maybe we should try breaking up the way our organization is structured internally. Maybe we should just do small things or seemingly small things like sharing the board packet with everyone who works in the organization unredacted to share that information, or take anonymized questions. The executive director takes anonymized questions at every staff meeting that people have as ways to increase transparency and information. But thinking about, most people complain about the places where they work, even if they love it. There's something that can be improved. So like most organizations' policies are in a Google sheet. Just fucking change the Google sheet. Just like change it to be something else. So when I think about that, I'll pause because I have other thoughts, but I know Toya is going to light up the chat here because every time she speaks, the chat's going. And so I've got like 3 things I'm looking at here, but I will pause here because I want to hear what Toya has to say about this one.
Great. The savior mentality always looks for solutions by working within our current system because deeper change might push us out of the picture. Toya, is that the problem?
First, Tim, can I just live in your world for one day? It sounds so easy and like nice and like just change the thing. Just 24 hours, Tim? Dang. Whew. Feels so nice. Oh, wow. So if it were that easy, I think a lot of folk would be doing more of that. And if it just were that, like, it just sounds so smooth. You made it sound so smooth. And you don't make any enemies, and you don't get shit out of it. And you don't have to worry about having your job afterwards. And you don't have to worry about nobody calling you back or answering your email or being shut out or shut out or shut out when you do these bold things, like what happens to me. So I think we got to understand and appreciate that we all, again, positional power, personal power. And I am constantly thinking about my personal power and my positional power, and sometimes they don't align. My positional power as executive director of a nonprofit sounds real good, right? But then my personal power as a Black woman in this country, comes up against that a lot. Many of us have these great ideas of, why don't we just do the damn thing already? But we have these funders who already don't trust us, and who already scrutinize us, and who already don't believe that we're going to do what we say what we're going to do. So that when we say something like, oh, this hierarchical structure doesn't work for us, or charismatic leadership doesn't work, the next leader of the organization doesn't necessarily need to have my personality. They just need to be able to lead. Philanthropy responds not kindly to people like me. They may respond kindly when somebody's like, hey, let's just do away with to somebody else. But in my shoes, from my lived experience, philanthropy does not respond kindly when you say things like shared leadership structure and you're a Black-led organization. Philanthropy does not respond kindly when you say things like healing and full benefits for everybody if they work part-time or full-time or anytime at all, because we're Black women and we be dying in the streets. And so all of these great innovative ideas sound wonderful. I just want to name that, like, when you say, wow, I want a board that looks like my constituency. I don't want a board that's like all corporate and all white. You don't necessarily, when depending on your positional power and your personal power, the response is different. And so it's only been in the last 12 months that the things that I've said haven't got me into big trouble. Big trouble, meaning, I'm the person who people will email after the meeting to tell me I'm so brave, but during the meeting, they're quiet and they don't say nothing. And they're like, Toya, you're so brave. Oh my God, I agree with everything you said. But the thing that I'm saying is so dangerous that they can't agree with me publicly. So I want to name that many of us in the Zoom room have been trying to make these changes, and let's just do away with this hierarchical structure. We want to do away with it. We've known that it hasn't worked for us, but we haven't been listened to, trusted, or believed. And so until the folks who fund this work, until the nonprofit industrial complex changes and stops divesting from real movement work, then, I don't know. I still want to live in your shoes for now it's a week. It was a day, but now I need a good week just to get a little, air to feel what it feels like to come up with an idea and just do it without having to fight until I'm almost dead. I don't know. What was the question?
That was a perfect answer to the question. I mean, I think it's worth having a full conversation about where funders are, where board members are, where thank you, Vashai, even staff and constituents land. And you have funders who also believe that hiring a DEI is the progress that we ordered. That Black Square is the progress that we ordered. So, like you said, like Brittany Cooper said, white people own time. So, it's a great place for a more full conversation. But I also want to. That is it was a very loaded quote. And I'm curious to hear a reaction to, we can be a savior one day and an ally the next. To the person who asked, that's a quote by Jordan Flaherty. So. Can you be a savior and an ally?
No, no, no. And that's, again, this is the stuff of Disney and constructed realities and fluff and marshmallow, no, how? And who wants to do that? Let's think about who really endeavors to do that. Who endeavors to do that? Who voted for Obama but is fighting to keep their schools segregated? Not me. That only works for a certain segment of the population to be a savior one day and an ally the next. Why are you a savior? What makes you a savior? What are the power structures in place that make you able to think that you can save? That's problematic. And that again speaks to the ways that our organizations are not led by the leaders. The real work of these organizations is being done by the people who are overworked, underpaid, not listened to, trusted, or believed. And then their genius ideas and work are siphoned, and the leader is like, hey, I did that. And philanthropy is like, that's how saviorism shows up. The stealing of ideas, the not giving credit, I forgot. Oh, yes, you did do that, didn't you? So I think it's hard to parse out how one, I have an issue with allyship as well. Like, who needs an ally? We need co-conspirators. We need folk on the, with some skin in the game, people, as David King said, in the dirt. You don't have to get in the dirt to be an ally. I could just be on Facebook or Instagram and call myself one and then go to lunch. It's not an actionable title. So I think, saviors and allies, I think those are things those are fictional characters of the past. And we should focus on the real ways that folks show up and name it.
Thank you. I'm speaking of fantastical and Disney. This is sort of I guess I'll call it a controversial concept. I'm just thinking about the rise and even recent criticism of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is famously leaderless. Is there a conversation to be had about the efficacy of a leaderless model in the nonprofit or arts education spaces? Tim, why don't you?
Yeah, I don't want to go after Toya.
There you go, Tim.
Yeah. No, I don't think anything in truly. All right. I don't see anything. I don't think it's leaderless. Like there's still leadership taking place. You might not be a formally appointed leader or have the title, but there's, again, if it's a collection of people, there's still something happening. There's still there's still that concept or element of leadership that's taking place. And I think this is where it becomes interesting to ask, much like if there isn't a CEO, what's the function of a CEO? What does a CEO do? And then how can we maybe pull that apart? And then how does that get done if a CEO is not there? And in a similar way, it's if there's not a leader, things are still happening. So it might be new to people and they're figuring out how to make it work because it might be unfamiliar. So you're figuring out how to communicate and building trust and psychological safety to function. But I don't think it's necessarily, maybe there could be a group that's completely absent of any kind of leadership, but I think there still is the element of leadership. It just shows up in different ways than maybe people traditionally think of it as showing up. Period. Toya, over to you.
Yeah, I've been obsessed with this issue just because I run a nonprofit, and people coming for Patrice colors, you know, there before the grace of God go I. I've been obsessed with it because I know that I'm also vulnerable to the same scrutiny, that I am not familiar with an organizational structure that is quote unquote leaderless, but I am familiar with the idea of collective leadership, because that is sort of the community organizing model that I grew up under, of collective leadership, not charismatic leadership. I've heard her describe Black Lives Matter as not a charity. Just this weekend in her message, saying that it's not a charity, that a part of the money is about reinvesting in communities. So I'm interested in this model of this not a charity, but a community based organization that is giving aid and investing in communities is interesting. I just don't know that there within the nonprofit industrial complex, there is space or language for what Black Lives Matter is yet. I don't know that there is a conceptualization or even room, given the way that the nonprofit industrial complex works, for a model where there is not one defined leader, where it is not a 501c3, right? Let's talk about, it's interesting that all this time has gone by and we haven't talked about these barriers like 501c3 status, right? Which makes or breaks you as in terms of our field and the ways that you can get support. And the ways that in the past 2 years, these organizations like the Okra Project, like Black Lives Matter, who do not have a 501c3, never wanted a 501c3, never would have one, are now multi-million-dollar entities. How individuals have invested in that model, more so than they are in our little 501c3 nonprofit organizations. I think that is a conversation worthy of having, and the ways that young people are finding to navigate and circumnavigate and get around this whole idea of a 501c3 status, that you can be an income earning entity and a community-based organization, that folks are finding the yes and in a complex, a system that is really digging in terms of not changing. So I think there's a lot to be learned from Black Lives Matter. I think that there's a lot to be noticed around the lack of trust in Black women's leadership specifically, and the accusations that came out that mirror the misogynoir that we all know about, the ways that her integrity has been called into question, and that every person she ever knew in her life had to put a testimonial out. When has that ever happened with any leader? We should all be ashamed that people, every person she ever met had to come out and vouch for her integrity. That's a lot. And we should be questioning that and leaning into looking into these alternative ways of being, because we know that the nonprofit industrial complex is not a sustainable model anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a much bigger conversation to be had around the economic piece of this conversation. But I want to sort of, not necessarily, well, I think we should transition to we are constantly having conversations like this. And Darrell Cooper and I actually, laugh and joke quite a bit about the fact that at the end of every one of these conversations, someone goes, oh, well, this is a great first step. And so we have had 1,000 great first steps, baby steps. This is a great baby step toward. And I'm just curious to know, what here we get to learn from your expertise and your advice. What are the big steps? No baby steps. What are the big steps that our field needs to take in order to be more imaginative about real generative leadership structures and ultimately best serve their missions.
One of the things that I keep saying in these rooms is folks have to really examine their implicit biases and start there. A lot of what we are experiencing, a lot of the barriers to change have to do with folks not owning and naming their implicit biases. Notice I said plural because it's not just the one. And I'm not just talking about white people. I'm talking about all of us. We all have implicit biases, and we have to work on them every single day. Until we do, we're not going to notice the ways that we're showing up funky and the ways that we're showing up that causes harm. We're going to continue to have fragility around the ways that we're causing harm because we're reticent to name our implicit biases. That's the first step. It was the first step for me and changed everything about the way that I work. And I would just encourage folks to do it. Just do the work. Own your stuff. Own the internal work that you have to do so that you can show up better and ready to see power. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to live it every day. And like that's, to me, the first thing. The second thing is, how long were you planning on being at this job? I mean, I'm just like, come on. And I want to go ahead and answer and speak from the I and answer the question in the chat, right? So part of my tenure at my organization was about making sure it survived, right? I never envisioned will I be at my organization 10 years or 9, however long I've been here, 8, 9, whatever it is, right? But speaking from the I, I wrote a grant to envision leadership transition in my organization and what a shared leadership model might look like. I knew I didn't know anything about it. So what do? You go hire somebody who knows something about it and who can help you, get your ish together, develop compensation policies, hiring policies, really have a rubric, really begin to articulate stuff, because unless it's written down, unless it shows up in a policy, it's not going to happen. So if you value diversity, equity, and inclusion, how's it showing up in your budget? Shout out to Alec Duffy at Jack for the 365 reparations project that is totally transforming that organization. I think there are so many organizations that are endeavoring to do this work, but are lacking the real support. So the first thing is examine your implicit biases. Examine your personal and positional power. This is everyone. There was a question about Black-led and BIPOC, led organizations causing the same harm. Absolutely. If you're operating within capitalist hierarchies, it doesn't matter what color you are. You're still gonna move in a certain way that creates and sustains barriers for other folk. The one is the internal work, and the second one is the external work of putting a hard deadline on your own tenure. If you bout it, then be bout it. When are you leaving? So that's all I have. That's all I can say publicly about how we're walking the walk at Vibe. But we have instituted in the past 12 months lots of policies that make our organization more equitable, that we've developed compensation policies, and a lot has been done to make sure that our core values are reflective of, our mission, and that it shows up no matter who the leader is, so that beyond my leadership, the organization is going to stand for certain things and is going to make sure that employees of the organization are taken care of in certain sustainable ways.
If you're interested in our shared leadership, our anti-racism journey that we've been on at Fractured Atlas, and you want to dig into it outside of this, I invite people to go to workshouldn'tsuck.co. And it details more about our policies and our journey and practices and how we've envisioned the shared leadership. As a white man who talks to a lot of white guys about the work, if you're not personally doing work around understanding racism and oppression, you are a shitty leader. This is a core leadership competency. How else are you going to know how to make decisions and weigh options? Like this is, yeah, it's not a DEI consultant. Maybe it starts with that. Maybe you're like, oh, I need to read some and listen to some podcasts. But like sitting, meditating on like the tensions that you feel as a white person around the characteristics of white supremacy culture and that organization you built that has those things embedded in it. This is the work that we have to do as white people. It is only from there that we can start doing it in our organizations in a way that is genuine. I think, I get a lot of questions about like how do you do this? I love just to sit with the antidotes to the classic, characteristics of white supremacy culture. They have like the sense of urgency and paternalism and sort of details that, and then right under that, they have like paragraphs of like things you can do in your organization as the antidote. Is like, just follow that. That's like, if you want a playbook, just go down and choose the ones that work for power and decision-making and creating better policies for your organization, and totally agree about the how long for tenure. And at Fractured Atlas, we just recently announced this, but we've been working on it for a while. My fellow co-CEO, Lauren Ruffin, and I are leaving at the end of August. And she's been here 5 years. I've been here 12. And there's some urgency. I recognize that just a sense of urgency is a characteristics of white supremacy culture, but there is a sense of urgency. I have 4 months left in this role. What's my responsibility to this work? Because after August 31st, I'm done here and someone else takes it over. How do we sort of prepare and what's necessary? So those questions have been theoretical for a while and are very much now like, got to do this stuff. So those are some of the ways that I think as we do this work, it adds up. The sector, I don't know, lots of organizations aren't going to do anything. Lots of organizations that put out statements of solidarity with the movement for Black lives aren't going to do shit about it. And they're getting held accountable a lot of times by their employees who are like, well, we put this out. What are we doing about it? And I think this is one of those moments where it's like, this is why doing the work personally. It's if you're that putting out a statement isn't the work. Making a black square on Instagram is not the work. Those we serve, those we're accountable to, are holding us accountable. And this is why are holding us accountable. And this is, God, I wish I knew how to finish this sentence. Period.
Thank you. I think it's a good time to sort of transition to attendee questions. Kinsey, can you help filter through some of those?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Before we do get started on that, there's just something that I should have acknowledged in my opening remarks that I just want to make sure that I say. So Carrie Ann Suarez, who is the executive director of equity in the center, was also slated to participate as a panelist in this conversation. And unfortunately, she was unable to join us today. And I just wanted to say that she sends her deepest regrets for not being here, both to all of you participants and to you, Brooke, Toya, and Tim. She also wanted me to note that she usually never misses an opportunity to talk about redistributing power and dismantling white supremacy. So I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge that Carrie Ann is not with us. We do wish that she was, but she's going to watch the recording as well. And now let's go ahead and transition to some of these questions. I will get through as many as we can. And I know, okay, so we touched on this first question, I think a little bit, Toya, when you were talking about the barriers of 501c3 nonprofits and like the economic structure there. But Eve Wolf asks, as nonprofits are often themselves as organizations in relationships where they lack power, for example, banking systems, foundations, relying on volunteers, etc. How do you think we can model new and different interorganizational and cross-field power sharing to help break down this organizational reliance on money and funding and other historically power-reliant relationships. I know that's lengthy. I'm also going to paste it in the chat right now.
Yeah, there's lots of conversations about our reliance on the philanthropic sector and our reliance on, as Brittany Cooper said, you know, white people own in time, right? Like, do we really have to wait? And we don't have the luxury of the time anymore. So there's a lot happening. There's a conversation happening, maybe y'all have, about solidarity funding. This sort of comes out of philanthropy, but it really doesn't. It comes out of organizations who are really demanding it. There are conversations around the changes that need to be made in philanthropy with regards to support and grant making and doing away with these 501c3 requirements. But I think ultimately organizations who have positional power and money, all the 98% of arts funding goes to, you know who they are going to have to commit to some type of shift, some type of rethinking. It's not going to be enough to put the black square in the box. It's not going to be enough to throw pennies at smaller organizations to partner with them anymore. There's going to have to be a redistribution of wealth in terms of where these dollars go and to whom. And until organizations lean away from the scarcity model and this hyper competitiveness that we are forced into, right? And really begin thinking about the fact that without us, ain't nothing to fund, right? So why don't we get together and really begin to lean into each other, and not in this way that, where, there's a funder who's encouraging or incentivizing you to form a partnership, but really around coming together, coalescing around calling in philanthropy, right? Accountability is an act of love, and, working on some real actionable items around holding those funders accountable. That's not popular. But what, that's why I come to these things. But that's the only thing that I think is going to move the needle or shift things in a way that's palatable.
Maybe it's just me and that my fellow co-CEO, Lauren Ruffin, also has a co-op, but feels like there's a moment that's happening right now around co-ops and different ways of convening. In the arts, Fracture Arts has a fiscal sponsorship program. So for years, artists have said, I don't want a 501c3. I want this thing for this. I want to work with these people on this project. And when we're done, and we don't need to keep this thing going. So, but also think about if we reframe it as media or larger than just the arts, there's like, where's creativity happening? Creativity I guess creativity happens all over the place, or could happen all over the place, but thinking about the narrowly defining it as arts and nonprofits, I think is not helpful in a way that the world is working. The way structures in the world are working. And so would myself encouraging to look beyond the traditional ecosystem in which we're working to see who else is doing stuff like this. Do they consider it art? Might we consider it art? Might we work together as we look for collaborations or other God, I'm really doing apologies to everyone else. So I feel like I've got three words per sentence that are just lose. But I think it's one, co-ops, two, look beyond the traditional circle of nonprofit arts. Things like giving circles, fiscal sponsorship, how we can convene and move capital differently than is traditional.
Thank you both. So I'm just going to pop over to the next question in our queue here. To the conversations around power and leadership, is there a possibility that a school could manifest that flat model as opposed to a pyramid model, or is that too fantastical?
I don't know what a flat model, I don't know enough about a flat model, but I do know that a shared leadership model is the way of the future. I want to just talk about how unfair it is to expect any one person, let alone someone who's from a marginalized group or two or three, to be the leader of an organization and be the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the fund development, the fundraiser, the programmer, the visionary, we set people up for failure unless they come from a background where there is enough generational wealth so that they can play all of those roles, so that they don't necessarily need to draw a salary in the first 5 years when it's a startup, so that they can, if the organization gets in trouble, make a couple of phone calls and raise $50,000 to $100,000. That we do a disservice to our Black and Brown leaders by setting them up for failure with this corporate structure of leadership, where we're calling, nonprofit CEO, I'm the CEO of the CFO of the, and it's like we're, incentivized to treat people as products and to model ourselves after what is perceived as a successful corporation. Those models have to change. And we know that we're looking at other younger nonprofits that are embracing a shared leadership model. And you see leaders with a fighting chance, leaders who are able to work around their actual skill set, leaders who are not necessarily charismatic, but are effective. So the charismatic leadership model is also bankrupt and goes right to white supremacy. This demand that someone be charismatic is attached to capitalist hierarchies and all of the isms that you can think of. That person also needs to be good looking and da-da-da-da-da. And within communities of color, these folks tend to be lighter skinned and tend to have a closer proximity to whiteness. So leaning away from charismatic leadership gives us an opportunity to further break down barriers and to create more jobs, really, frankly, for the people who are actually leading on the ground. I think there's nothing but good that can come of it. I don't know what a flat leadership model is, but I know that a shared leadership model may be the way to go for so-called BIPOC-led organizations until, the world changes.
There are a number of seemingly increasing groups that are looking at shared and distributed leadership models in various different sectors and organizations. The work that Inspiral is doing, if you're interested, I can't think of it as it relates to a school, but Inspiral is an organization that is based in Europe that's looking at different models. There's a book, Going Horizontal. The Leader Morphosis podcast has a lot of conversations about different leadership models. There's the Frederick Laloux classic, Reinventing Organizations, that I quibble with in parts. But what I usually take from this is examples. Like it's not going to be a template that I can use in an organization or for a specific example. It's going to be like, all right, so who's doing things similar or differently? And then how do we want to make decisions about what we want to do by looking at different organizations in different sectors as it relates to structuring? And it's what we did at Fracture House when we went from one person to four. We're like, who's doing stuff similar to this so we can learn like how it works, how it doesn't, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, so that we have a better chance of success that this works, rather than it ends as a failed experiment and we go back to one person running the organization. So for those who are interested, I'm sorry I can't think of one specific instance about a school, but I think poking around in those different places might come up with a couple of examples.
All righty. So moving forward, let's see, our next question, I will paste this in the chat as well. I work at an organization led by BIPOC folks, where these harmful white supremacist structures are very much at play and crushing to morale. How would you recommend going about this conversation with leadership? I think when they hear conversations like this, it's in one ear and out the other because they feel like it doesn't apply to their work too.
Find someplace else to work. You know, a year ago, I may have told you, ooh, go talk to them and, you know, just find another job, because when you know, if at a certain point in a nonprofit's life, and when they have firmly in the nonprofit industrial complex, meaning $1.5 million or more, some folks say, then it is hard to divest from it. And even though they may be well-meaning, and again, you know, Black Lives Matter, they may be Black Lives Mattering it up in order for them to actually do things that are helpful to you and that will prolong your professional life and personally. I don't know that in your lifetime, those changes are going to be made, or that your efforts will be received favorably. I don't know the organization, but my instinct is to say, maybe find another place to work that has more alignment with your core values. And that's another thing I wanted to say to everyone. You know, alignment is important, and we rob ourselves of that. Alignment with your core values. You deserve to have alignment with your core values. Your job should align with your core values and not make you feel icky or bad or deficient or not worthy or not enough. And if your job evokes all of those feelings, it doesn't matter who leads it, you should probably work someplace else. And 9 times out of 10, that organization is, you know, so deeply embedded within a nonprofit industrial complex that your efforts, you know, will be for naught. Lots of places to work. Find someplace else. Sister to sister.
I also, I mean, just to piggyback on what Toya said, I also want to just weigh in here and say, you know, be mindful of how positional power affects that personal power, and don't leave yourself kind of milling around in a place or position where one is eroding the other, just for your own sanity. So I'm gonna echo Toya's advice there.
And I want to hear Marcus Johnson. It's hard out here. There aren't a lot of jobs, right? There are not a lot of jobs out there. There's many folks are in a bad position in the first place. So I want to lift that up and say that we all are doing what we need to do to survive, and you deserve alignment.
With the arrival of COVID and a lot of organizations going remote, what's happened is a lot of organizations have created toxic workplaces in people's homes now. There's no longer that barrier between this is my home and now I'm going to work. So yeah, we have decisions to make. And I think now, living through a pandemic, I mean, we're still living through a global pandemic, that there's more vaccine, there are vaccines, but there's still a great deal of uncertainty with where we are in life and our health, and a lot of questions around, do I value this job in the same way? What if I have to go back into the office? What if I'm going back into the office, but more people are coming here and I don't feel like my workplace can keep me safe, and having to make decisions between personal health and safety and having a job. And feeling like leadership doesn't understand that. And it's sometimes, yeah, it's like, I can't do this. This does not align with my values and me as a person and my purpose. Sometimes it's saying, I'm going to do this for right now, and I have a time horizon of 12 months, and I'm going to work to get out at 12 months. But during this time, they only can have so much of me, and I'm doing this intentionally. This is me doing it. This is not, and this is what I'm going to get from here, and maybe the learning, whatever it might be. At the end of the day, yeah, there's probably 25% of organizations on a pyramid that you hope, like most organizations, would get it and do something. But that bottom 25%, no one's going to convince them that this is work that they need to do. And realizing that it helps to reframe, to say, okay, well, then what, with my agency and autonomy and the decisions that I can make, how do I want to show up in the organizations?
And I want to lift up what Brooke put in the chat. We're socialized. I was socialized to believe that I could change anything, that I can change the world, that I can go into a racist environment and change it with my will and my changity. And we spend a lot of energy around that, and we die. We'll be dead. It's called John Henryism. You can look it up. So this idea of remaining in toxic environments with this idea that we alone will change it is how we die, many of us, in doing this work. And so I just want to lift up what Brooke is saying, is that it's to believe that you alone are the key, and maybe your job may like you believing that and may need you to believe that, but really looking at the toll, the physical toll that it takes on Black and brown folks, these toxic racist environments. There is a health toll, and we really do die. So it's not hyperbole. We really do have to consider our work environments and whether or not they are sustainable for our own longevity.
Thank you for that. We have about 5 minutes left in the call. I think we can do another question. So the next question up is from our attendee from the Colored Girls Museum. I'm curious about how Tim is hearing what Toya is saying and how he might respond to some of Toya's critique in rethinking his leadership.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And also, God, thank you, Toya. I sort of sometimes luck into being in spaces like this with people who provide a lot of things that I need to meditate on. That's why I never wanted to go before or after Toya in this session. Because I'm constantly having to rethink the defaults that I have. What is leadership? How do I show up? What's an organization? And this is why it's my journey in understanding racism and oppression cannot be separated personal and professional. It's for me, this is me and how I show up, and conversations like we have today allow me to go back and rethink sort of the one, what did I say? What do I believe? How does it show up? And I think this is what I value, and hopefully makes me better in my work. As I think about, most of my work is spent, how do you do the thing? And like, what do we have to do that thing? And yeah, sometimes I'll say, yeah, it's like, we do this. And like, of course, it's like the white guy's like, yeah, just totally do that thing. But all right. So it's yeah. So I don't know. I guess that's to say, I have a page of my own notes from this, and I feel like I need the transcript from this too, because there's so much stuff that came from this conversation today that allows me to rethink and think about and more deeply learn to actually sit and meditate on the concept of power and inclusion and what it means to be a group of people trying to achieve something. So that's where I am right now with it. Thank you for that question. And maybe we can chat in like a week after I have some time to process it. And thanks again, Toya. I'm never going after you at
Tim, let's do a Freaky Friday. Let's do it. I'm gonna name it. Let's do a Freaky. Let's just switch places. I just need a week. Damn, please.
We all want in on that week. I think that's probably, Kinsey, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's probably our last question, right? Okay. I think we should, take a moment for gratitude to Toya and Tim for everything that they have given us during this past 90 minutes and to synthesize, the following ideas. We should be thinking a lot about examining our own implicit biases, examining our positional and personal power, thinking about, particularly if you are a person with power, how organizations act out white supremacist values, and then also looking beyond traditional models of moving capital around. I also want to shout out something from the chat, which comes from Vashai, specifically about needing to be reminded that these organizations were not necessarily founded by, all of these organizations were not necessarily founded by us, those without power. Don't necessarily, despite what they might say, don't necessarily exist for our benefit. So, and I do want to thank Toya specifically for, pointing us to pointing us to the John Henryism that I think is so prevalent. We're exposing ourselves to these environments, and how damaging that can be, how harmful that can be. Thank you again. I'm going to turn it back over at this point to Kinsey. This has been a great conversation. Hopefully to be continued.
It truly has, and yes, absolutely must be continued. Thank you so much, Toya, Tim, and Brooke. Wow. And I'm really happy that we're going to be having a post-session discussion shortly. But first, before we close this portion out, I just want to uplift. I know it was in the chat. We touched on it a couple of times, but I just want to uplift. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now for the list of demands for centering Black women's leadership in arts education. This list has been published for many weeks now, and please read it, sign on. We also are releasing an aligned actions worksheet for organizations to check, basically give themselves a scorecard, see how they're doing, see what they can do better. It is an incredible list. Shout out to Toya, shout out to David King, and the whole team of people who made that happen, who wrote it. It's incredible. I charge you all with reading it and taking action with it. So thank you all so much for being here with us today. Thank you to our incredible panelists and moderator. While you're here, if you don't mind completing a quick poll about the event today, we would love to hear from you. It's really quick, just a couple of questions. And I do also invite you all to please join us for our next face-to-face sessions. The next one is actually happening right at 6 p.m. today. That's going to be our second community dine-around. This dine-around is centered on being in solidarity with the AAPI community. So if you're able to join us, it's from 6 to 7 p.m. directly after this. You can send me or Megan Zhang a message in the chat if you need the link to join us. Then Thursday, starting at 10 a.m., we have Talking to Funders about DEI work, another excellent panel. And at 4 p.m., Building an Intentional Classroom, Trans and Non-Binary Inclusion. I'm going to ask Megan if you don't mind to put a link in the chat to our face-to-face schedule. If you don't have links to those either and you would like them, you can simply send me a message, email me, and I will send those over to you. I also want to share that today the Roundtable launched a new initiative in partnership with NYSCA, the New York State Council on the Arts. This initiative is called Empire State Creates, Teaching Artist-Led Activities for Everyone. It's a new pilot grant program seeking to distribute $1,500 grants to 15 independent teaching artists in New York State to create asynchronous arts learning resources for distribution in community settings. So if you'd like more information on that and to apply, you can visit the link that's going to be popped in the chat. And that's it. So if you are interested and able to stick around for the next half an hour, we are going to now do Show Your Face. That is our post-session chat. If you do stick around, we'll make you a panelist so you can come off video or come on video, and you'll have the ability to come off of mute as well to continue the conversation for this incredible panel. So I'm going to invite in a moment Asari Beal, Tracy Lester, and Erica Atkins up. Asari is the Executive Director of Teachers and Writers Collaborative. Tracy is the Executive Director of the Center for Fiction, and Erica is the Executive Director for Bloomingdale School of Music. So I hope you all join us. And one last time, I'm going to say thank you so much, Toya, Tim, and Brooke. You are, of course, welcome to stay for the chat, but by no means is that expected of you or required, but just thank you. We're so grateful to you all. And here we go.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for sticking around for this Show Your Face portion of the session. It's good to see some faces popping up into the screen. And if you need to stand up and stretch or get some water, do whatever you need to do that. Right now, we're going to, I guess Kinsey introduced me, but I'll introduce myself again and also share that in addition to being relatively new Executive Director of Teachers and Writers Collaborative, I'm a writer and have been a teacher. So this is work that's very close to my heart. And I also helped, I was part of the group that created that Centering Black Women list of demands. So I'm really honored to have been involved with the Roundtable in that way. So I'll pass it over to Erica you could just introduce yourself and share how you've been involved with the Roundtable as well.
Yeah, so I'm Erica Atkins. I'm the Executive Director of the Bloomingdale School of Music. I'm also new in my leadership at Bloomingdale. I've been there since September. Previously, I was actually at opening act for 5 years, where I was last the Deputy Director. Shout out to all my opening act people who I see popping up in here. I am also the Secretary of the Board of Directors for the Roundtable, as well as on several different committees. So I'm really excited and honored to be here as well. Tracy.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Tracy Lester. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Fiction. Just recently joined the Center for Fiction about 10 days ago. I was a former Executive Director of the National Dance Institute. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm having a hot flash after that discussion, so I'm a fan of myself. And I am also on the board of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. And I can't just say how proud I am of the Roundtable for this face-to-face conference. The sessions have been amazing, and this discussion was just tremendous. So I'm just thrilled to be here.
Thank you both. So I'm really just curious for folks who just listened to those amazing discussions. For folks who aren't necessarily in leadership positions, I'm just curious if they feel that they have a voice in their organizations and can advocate for their voices. I mean, I really love one of the things that Toya said, that we need to invest in the leaders who are really the people who are doing the work. And so for folks who are not necessarily like in a senior management position, do you feel that you have space in your organizations to advocate for your voice through your own leadership? I'll check the chat. Well, if you have an opinion on that, pop it in the chat. In the meantime.
I think that, I mean, I've been an executive director for now a long time. And what I've seen is that oftentimes my colleagues in other settings don't feel that they have a mechanism for offering input or contributing to conversations that impact the organization's structure or direction. And so creating ways for all the staff to come together to share information is, I think, one of the things we're talking about here. It's not just about shared leadership. It's about sort of opportunities for giving input that will be heard and input that will be sort of implemented. So making people feel as though they have a space for that and that there's an opportunity to contribute is really important. Not every organization has that. Not every organization that says that actually offers that. And not every organization knows even how to sort of facilitate that or process that. So creating opportunities for staff to come together cross-departmentally, cross-sector, cross whatever, so that they're sharing information that can be lifted up together is a really important strategy to figure out.
Yeah, and I think, you know, something you just said, Tracy, keyword to me is facilitating, right? That's the difficult part of it. And because some people don't have that skill set, they just want to skip it all together. The facilitation of bringing everybody together, getting everyone's opinion on the table, creating environments where other people can share their work. For example, it's really important to me. I don't do the full report out on what we're doing at Bloomingdale by myself during board meeting. I speak for about a minute, and then I let my leadership come in and do the rest, because it's really important to me that my boys see their faces and know that they're doing the work. And something I encourage on our team, even if people aren't in the meeting, you say the names of everybody doing the work, right? And because some people don't have that skill set, they just skip it instead of learning it or doing the work. And I think that's a really key word right there, facilitation. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tracy.
Well, I mean, there were a lot of amazing points made during the discussion. And so just thanks again to Toya, Brooke, and Tim. One of the things that just like pinged me when Toya said it, which is, you know, we're expected to be the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. And I mean, you know, you can be a jack of all trades and a master of none, but actually what you need to do as a leader is acknowledge that all the people around you have all the salient skill sets and viewpoints and perspectives and experience to contribute to the overall success of an organization. So, I mean, to expect that a leader would have every skill set imaginable is absurd. I mean, we work together as a team and we should move forward in that way.
That's so true. I mean, what did you all think about the point about 501c3s? Is the 501c3 model just like, is that part of the problem, since we're all relying basically on donors and often on wealthy funders?
Yeah, it sounds reasonable. The question is, how do you unpack that? How do you break that down and move forward? I mean, because we're all constrained by laws and codes and, you know, restrictions and IRS. Oh my God, the IRS and, you know, the Secretary of State and all this stuff, just to be able to help communities and support families and deliver creative programming in the arts. The bureaucracy is crazy. And I think with COVID, what we learned is like half of that bureaucracy can get tossed out the window. You don't need to sign something in blue ink. You can deliver it by email. Like all these things that were created just to create roadblocks for moving forward started to crumble during COVID because they couldn't be implemented. So it's a great time to revisit those conversations.
Something that Toya said earlier that I've been thinking about a lot is that a lot of the issues that we face in the nonprofit industry, it's industry-wide, right? Like in terms of the issues with 501c3s, how we fundraise, how we get money, that you have to throw a big fancy gala in order to get the money to run your program. It's industry-wide. So I've been thinking a lot about how do you actually address that on a larger level, and like what role can I play in that, both within my organization and, you know, further than that. And certainly something that I've thought about is that could be work that, you know, I transfer to at some point. And I think that's something for people to think about in general. If you're recognizing the issues with the nonprofit industry, like how do you want to address it? Do you want to address it within your organization? Do you want to address it on a larger scale? I think one of the things that's missing right now is people who have actually done this work aren't the one making the policies, writing the laws, like being involved with that level of work. They're not the ones who are doing this. It's people who have never done this kind of work, who are making the rules that we all have to follow by. Or even like every time they pass a new, you know, HR law that like I agree with wholeheartedly, they do it in a way that makes it really hard for nonprofits to implement. Clearly, there's no one sitting at that table who's done that kind of work. And so that's something that I think about a lot. How can people who have done the work get involved on a bigger level with the policies and the laws that are affecting? And the issue might be the 5013C model, period. Like that just needs to be redone, broken down, abolished. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think advocacy is so important. It looks like Bashia had her hand raised for a question. Do you still have a question? You could just unmute and go ahead and
yeah. Hi, how are you guys doing? Ladies, you guys are phenomenal. Thank you so much for having me on this platform just to ask the question that I have. There was something in the chat. And I just want to thank Toya and Brooke for just all of that queenness that was just raining through. I needed that energy. And I, you know, reflected upon this that was said in the chat. And it was like, you know, the 501c3 model is, you know, the same model as the sharecropping model. Right. So like, can we unpack that? Like, what does that mean? I'm really trying to understand what that means because I'm here to learn. And I feel like just being a student constantly is going to help the evolvement process for us as Black women who are leaders, even, you know, to evolve even more, not just in this nation, but beyond. So I'm very curious to understand what that means. The 501c, how is that connected? When was it formed? You know, obviously, like, you know, doing the research that I have done in the past, these things are not necessarily like accessible. As we are Black women, we are creating these, you know, places and resources that provide more information with a lot of, you know, research and time. So I'm just really trying to unpack that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know when it was created. It's a great question. I think it's, and I don't know who made the reference, but my guess is they're, you know, trying to make a correlation between having to pay into a system that is both cumbersome and tedious and doesn't benefit you. And so, and how does that trickle down, right? And we go through all these loopholes to create a 501c3 and nonprofit that just has obstacle after obstacle in your way to try and achieve your goal or implement your program or deliver your service. So I'm assuming that's what the person who offered that suggestion meant. But if others have more information on the history of it, let us know.
Well, I wanted to share a little bit too, based on my experience. My name is Mafor Mambote. I'm the executive director of Siren Protectors of the Rainforest. We're a dance company. And initially, when we started our group, it was 5 dancers who wanted to create a circle of leadership, as opposed to just having one person that would speak for the group or one person that you would sign papers or whatnot. And the backlash that we received from not just the banking system, but other nonprofits was like just a bit much. And we were, the way that we approached it was like kind of like the farming method that we learned from our mothers, watching them work fields or whatnot. And that was that, you know, if you have an idea, we all come together and help you with that idea. And when the next person has an idea, we all get together and help that person with that idea, as opposed to always having, you know, a president, a assistant president, a secretary. And believe it or not, it ended up breaking the group because we didn't want to have a president. We didn't want to have an ED. And we had to conform in order to just stay alive. And in conforming, we lost like major players that were supposed to actually propel the organization forward. So I'm curious to find out if at this stage now, would that form of leadership still work, or are we still going to get pushbacks?
I think that that's a totally valid and important question, because, you know, Toya kept using this expression, the nonprofit industrial complex. Well, that right there says it. If you're buying into this system, then it's sort of, it seems like you have to abide by the rules that are already existing. So I mean, I think that there's a lot there. Eve had a great comment, and she also had her hand up for a question. So Eve, you want to go ahead and unmute and share?
Yeah, I was just sort of along this lines of the 501c3. I was just referencing back from the original comment during the session that Biddy City Players had shared, particularly around 501c3s needing organizing funding goals around how funders can reduce their taxes, right? And that idea of like the whole way that it's set up is not about the people who are participating in it, but the people who are benefiting financially from it. But this also speaks to one of the sort of a side where my hand was raised about this idea, right, of changing funding or changing how we go about the funding structure, and speaks to, you know, what Tim had brought up earlier too about risk. You know, I'm a deputy director at my organization now, but had spent the past 7+ years working in fundraising consulting, and so seeing this question and need arise for a variety of reasons, but with organizations all over the city, of this fear of taking the risk of changing the fundraising model that might lead you to lose the funding you already have, right? Like Erica, you mentioned the gala, right? And I produced over 100 galas in my day, but like lots of people hate galas. But if you don't do it, will you still get that 50, 100, 1 million, thousands of dollars through another way? Will it be a massive hit to your bottom line? And like, you know, and that's just one example. You know, if you aren't organizing your communications in the same way, are your board members or your major donors and be like, why aren't I getting my regular communications that I've always seen? You know, but those communications are probably really oriented towards your traditional, potentially often white, rich, capitalistic oriented funders, right? So how are we, I've just seen a lot of organizations struggle with this. How do we like underwrite the risk to change our systems so that we aren't paying somebody to create communications towards a certain type of funder if that's a funder we don't even want anymore, you know? So I just sort of putting that out there to the group. I think a real struggle that a lot of us are living in, or maybe have witnessed or are in the process of taking on.
I think there are creative movements everywhere right now, sparks happening all over the place, and people are being innovative and trying to figure out ways to kind of move projects, programs, things along. And so Brooke, I think, touched on it in terms of apps or technology or other ways of sharing resources. And so I think, Bashia, to your point, I believe that there is a way to move forward without having to sort of be beholden to that structure that's kind of in place now around the 501c status, because we see movements all over the place. Look, like GameStop, when the people created like the way to sell stock without having to go through the stock exchange, like they just figured out how to go around it, and they like made a store that was closing down, like all of a sudden be a hot stock. Like people are thinking about ways to work around the system, to access resources, collect resources, connect with people. And virtual environments, I think, have allowed for that in kind of a crazy way. So I think there are a lot of movements underway that will show other ways to do governance structure, running nonprofits, or, you know, sharing information.
And I think to Tracy's point, the way that we move forward together is that we continue to find a way to share like work together, share those resources together, collectively move forward like as a field, because we're going to be the ones who are going to figure it out, because it's not necessarily in the self-interest of those who fund us to figure it out, but it is in our own self-interest to find better ways of sustainability moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see Anuparna had her hand up. Do you want to unmute and speak?
Hi. Incredible talk, and I'm actually on the cusp of us possibly starting a 501c3. Well, I've been told to start a 501c3, and then hearing these other alternatives, and also the structure, like having a hierarchical structure, which I personally was not necessarily fond of, but I saw other values to it. But more like if I was to be, I needed it only for almost like a point person, like who's going to tell people about the organization if you're founding it, right? Like who knows the most about it, or nobody knew who to go to. And I also, one of my skill sets is organizing, like I'm able to organize people. But yeah, I really don't like thinking of it as like, okay, yeah, I see how it could be like one person's above the other kind of thing. It could be that you have like these jobs that you're good at that make the organization go. Am I like right for a 501c3? Like, it's been going well. I'm working in Long Island with an arts organization. I'm creating an arts organization for people with invisible disabilities, focusing on mental health, and there's nothing like it out here. And it's just been like really gaining a lot of momentum faster than I even expected. And I would love if somebody has some good advice for me, whether and how to continue, since there was so much said, like maybe in a summary, like, because I have that next step to take. Thank you so much.
Is the next step you're asking about forming a 501c3? Is that your question?
Like, should I do it at this point? Like people are saying how that's broken, or it could be broken, and there's other alternatives. Like I cannot do it too at this point, right? And but like then there's also well, look how well it works for people so far. If you're able to like take, like, do we risk it? You're saying that the risk might be too much to not do it that way, that it won't succeed, so like I'm left a little bit, I had trepidation in going in the traditional way, and this spoke about a lot of my trepidation, but now I don't know what to do, because I was going to go ahead and do it the traditional way anyway.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe there are people here who in the chat would be available to talk with you more offline. I mean, I would be hesitant to tell you which way to go, not knowing enough about your organization, but there might be others here who would be available. Also, the New York Lawyers for Public Interest is available to sort of talk through the pros and cons of whatever structure you want. They're free pro bono lawyers who want to help people. So you might reach out to them and sort of weigh the pros and cons. But I personally don't have enough information about your structure and organization to be able to offer an opinion.
Okay.
But maybe others do.
New York Lawyers for
Public Interest.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Kim just put the link in the chat.
Yeah, because it's a lot to think about in terms of who you're serving, who is your network that's supporting you in this journey, and kind of there's a lot of questions to work through that can't be answered in a couple minutes.
I want to share that Caroline shared in the chat how to make sure the decision-making board is connected to and reflects the constituency, when such a huge function of the board is fundraising and networking. And I think that that's a question. How do you do that? I mean, Erica, Tracy, any thoughts about that? Especially for those of us who maybe are from organizations that have been around a long time and really have this kind of board that is not really connected to the constituency. I'm just curious, like, how do you make a shift?
Well, it doesn't happen overnight, and sometimes it's hard to move people along to create space for other people. So you can expand the space. You can create more opportunities, bring more people in, like sort of envelop around other people who are still there and won't leave. So, you create opportunities to expand the board so that you can bring more people on board. It's not always easy to sort of shift a board overnight. So.
And it sounds like Caroline, she just said in the chat that she had a brand new organization, so she wants to do it right from the beginning, which is such a fortunate position.
Yeah,
like
we've all inherited organizations that aren't brand new, so it's a different conversation for
what
us.
a position to
I
be
know, right?
So I would say, just really think about, what do you need? Who do you want to be reflected? What are the skill sets that are missing based on your mission, and who your constituency is? Who are you trying to reflect? And also, do you need people from outside the constituency to reflect it? Like, just really take the time to think about that, and then write a dream list. I've had, people reach out to me who are starting early organizations, and I'm sure some other people have, and you can tell that they took the time to really think about, who do I want to be reflected in this space, and what kind of experience do I want them to have? And I think that's, what a great position to be in.
Yeah, I love this quote in the chat from Haley about forming a 501c3, in my mind, as a way to participate in the market. And I think that's a really great point, because if you don't need what that has to offer, then you don't need to go down that road. So I think that's a great point to lift up.
Well, we're just about at time. I think we have maybe like part of a minute left. Does anybody have any other takeaways? But Erica and Tracy, are there any things that came up in this conversation that you think you can take away and apply in your organization?
I don't have all the answers, and the people around me and the people I work with, it's where I turn for information, inspiration, and creativity. So my takeaway is just never to forget that we're part of it's a collective effort.
Yeah, similar to being in the same position. I think being a new executive director, you have to depend on your team in order to be successful, and you really have to lean on them. So my mission for myself is to never forget that feeling in your first year where you're like, how am I making the decision? I've been here for like 2 weeks. Okay. But like, you got to talk to your team. You got to lean in on them. You have to go through conversation. You got to pull the whole team in. Even my faculty members, my resident teaching artists, they all got to be a part of the conversation. And I don't want to lose that.
Yeah. It's totally with you. The teaching artists in my organization, they're the heart of the work. So I always want to be listening to what their ideas are and what they're thinking about. Because like Toya said, we got to let the leaders who are really doing the work do the leading of the organization. Well, thank you, everybody. I don't know. Oh, Kimberly is still here. I don't know if Kinsey is still here.
Yeah, we are. Well, first off, thank you, Asari, Erica, Tracy, for joining us for this Show Your Face. And so glad to see so many familiar faces and new faces from our community joining us as well. We actually have our next face-to-face program happening right now over in another Zoom. We are doing a dine around. So bring a little snack, bring your dinner, and we're going to be having a talk about standing in solidarity with the AAPI community. But really, thank you everybody for joining us today, and looking forward to continuing the conversation soon. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.